Resuming debate, reprise de débat. The honourable member for Courtenay-Alberni.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased and honoured to have the opportunity to rise today to speak on motion 42 regarding the Canada-Barbados income tax agreement. I want to thank the member from Joliet for bringing forward this bill. Madam Speaker, millions of hardworking Canadians pay their taxes in full every year, year after year. Meanwhile, some of the wealthiest people in this country are able to avoid paying their fair share by stashing billions of dollars in offshore tax havens. This unfair sweetheart deal for millionaire tax evaders is leaving less money for health care, infrastructure, transit, and other crucial public services all Canadians rely on. Motion M42 seeks to ensure that all Canadians, from billionaire corporations to single-income families, would pay the same fair taxation rules. Instead of executives from Petro-Canada enjoying a new yacht or luxury vacation thanks to the savings they benefited from due to filtering their money into tax havens, I'd prefer to see middle-class Canadians benefit. People in my riding at Courtenay-Alberni could certainly benefit, and people across this country. We look at the needs in our country. There's people living on the streets. We need money for homeless shelters. We've talked about a national child care program to help tackle inequality. This is billions of dollars that could pay for this important infrastructure and the needs we have in our communities. A pharmacare program. Aboriginal education we know is heavily underfunded, yet we're giving tax breaks to the rich. And Madam Speaker, the amount of money that these big corporations and CEOs are saving could be huge in investing in clean energy and tackling climate change. We have opportunities to move forward if we do the right thing, and that is to make sure that these big corporations are paying their fair share. The NDP has always fought for the rights of hardworking Canadians, and as a party, we wholeheartedly support the idea of fighting tax havens that cost Canadian taxpayers. We believe that the motion M42 by the member from Joliet is a good initiative for restoring Canadians' trust in our tax system and closing a multi-billion-dollar tax loophole. In 2014, an NDP MP tabled a private member's bill, Bill C-621, that sought amendments to make it easier for the government and the courts to identify, prosecute, and convict tax cheats who hide their money in tax havens. Peggy Nash said in 2013, over the past 10 years, Canadians have invested over $390 billion in Barbados, which has a population of 284,000 people. They invested $175 billion in the Cayman Islands, which has a population of 55,000 people. Obviously, some of the money is absolutely above board and legitimate, but the money that is not legitimate means that the average middle-class family gets hammered and ends up paying more in taxes, plus getting less in government programs and services than they would otherwise if this money were adequately reported and taxed. Barbados has become the tax haven of choice for Canadian corporations and billionaires, ahead of other countries such as Luxembourg and the Cayman Islands. In 2007, there was a reported 33.4 billion Canadian dollars parked in Barbados tax havens. Move forward to 2008, it was $53.2 billion. And over the last 5 years, since 2011, it's gone from $45 billion to $108 billion being parked offshore. This is during, simultaneously, Canada has been lowering income tax rates for Canada's largest corporations. In the last 25 years, we've seen taxes being reduced from 28 to 15%. So corporations are getting a great tax break here at home, yet they're moving money offshore. When I think about my riding, I think about a third of the children living in poverty in the Alberni Valley, a fifth of the children, 20% of the children in the Comox Valley living in poverty, seniors in Oceanside living in poverty. The average income in my riding is $26,000 a year. And this government has brought forward a tax break for the middle class, while anyone earning $23 an hour working full-time or less gets nothing. That's 2/3 of Canadians, and it's more like 3/4 of the people living in Courtenay-Alberni. Madam Speaker, when we see tax breaks for CEOs that cost Canadian taxpayers $750 million a year, when we see corporations pushing money offshore and not paying their fair taxes, when we see so-called tax breaks for the middle class that benefit those the most that earn between $50 and $100 an hour, we know there's a problem. Madam Speaker, tax havens are not only unfair, but they're helping fuel growing inequality in Canada. We're seeing huge inequality, as we know, one of the biggest economic crises in our country today. And, Madam Speaker, this tax haven, this tax loophole, is the biggest economic leakage in Canada right now. And the government has an opportunity to take concrete action to prevent Canadian companies and taxpayers from using these loopholes to avoid paying their fair share of taxes. And according to 2015 Stats Can data compiled for Canadians for Tax Fairness, we know that the Caribbean island, Barbados, is now Canada's third top destination for foreign investment. This is after the United States and the United Kingdom. I want to thank the member from across the floor, the government member, for bringing forward the actions the government's going to take to try to deal with these tax loopholes around companies avoiding paying tax. But I think that it's one thing to invest in money for CRA to chase people that are avoiding paying tax. It's another thing to actually change laws so that we can actually make sure that it's illegal for those to move money into these tax havens. So we have an opportunity to change these agreements with other countries and close these tax loopholes. And there's a big difference between that and breaking the law, when right now it's legal, actually, to move money offshore. So I want to thank the member from Joliet for bringing this forward, because this is an important solution, and the government needs to look at legislation to do that, and this is the right legislation to get started with that. We know that there are many other deals that we have with other countries that also need to be looked at around the world, but this is an excellent start. Former Prime Minister Paul Martin registered companies in Barbados to avoid paying Canadian taxes. So no wonder the current Liberal government is so unclear regarding their policy on tax havens. And I'll talk about another former Liberal, but he was at the time he was a New Democrat, because Bob Rae at the time, and this is from CBC. He got up and said the government is entering into these tax treaties without being fully aware, this is in 1980, Madam Speaker, of the impact they will have on domestic taxation in Canada. Money that is income and not being taxed at the corporate level, on which the government receives no revenue, has the unfortunate effect of increasing the load of taxation on the average citizen. Isn't that true? In an era when we've got skyrocketing costs in healthcare, infrastructure costs that are soaring through the roof, when we're dealing with the need to address our greenhouse gas emissions, this is a really important time for us to plug this economic leakage and get on it. Dennis Howlett, the Executive Director of Canadians for Tax Fairness, sums this up perfectly. He said, "Isn't it just Donald Trump who likes to brag that it is smart to avoid paying taxes? Some Canadian multinationals and wealthy individuals are unapologetic about setting up shell companies or foundations in tax havens for no other reason than to avoid paying their fair share at home. In some, but not all cases, it's technically legal, but it contravenes the spirit of law and simply is not fair." And we got to talk about fairness, Madam Speaker, because when I talk about everyday Canadians, when I think about my friends at home, my friend Jennifer and John who run a whale watch company, or my friend Mike Madison who went to work this morning at the mill, or his wife Michelle, and I think about my friend Corey who's working on the golf course today, law-abiding Canadians from Qualicum Beach to Tofino that are doing everything they can to make sure they pay their fair share, to build a healthy Canada, while these corporations are taking the money out of the country. Madam Speaker, in closing, I believe that motion 42, tabled by the member from Joliet, is a step in the right direction for restoring Canadians' trust in our tax system and closing this multi-billion-dollar tax loophole. However, while Barbados appears to be the tax haven of choice for Canadians, there are several other countries, including Panama, as we know, Turks and Caicos and Bermuda, with similar sneaky taxation agreements with Canada. Motion M42 is a good start, but it's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to tax fairness for all Canadians. Thank you, Madam Speaker.